banker and businessman. He was one of the people who started the Barnett Bank chain in Florida. He was also president of the Florida Senate in the early 1900s.
Ruby Jackson was born in 1909 in a rural area outside of Ocala, Florida. It was 40 years after the end of slavery.
Ruby McCullough was a black woman that came along during a very defining period of our history.
Slavery ended, black codes began, black codes ended, Jim Crow began. So you're talking a good 400 and some years of people pretty much having this sense of superiority.
Klan was running rampant. The Klan just had Florida in a stranglehold.
An African American living in the state of Florida had the highest chance of getting lynched out of any black person in the nation.
Living under the system of Jim Crow in the South was like living in hell.
The Florida Ku Klux Klan is the most powerful paramilitary organization in the United States between the 1920s and the 1950s. It has so much power. The Klan runs entire cities. It runs entire counties.
A lot of your KKK members was judges, was lawyers, was doctors. They put on those hoods, and those was the KKK guys.
I knew one gentleman that was proud to show you his KKK card from the 50s.
I was never really interested in the Klan. I thought, from what I could hear, sometimes things they did was probably good, but sometimes things they did wasn't good. So myself, I wouldn't be involved with it.
But on Saturdays, Friday evenings and Saturdays, the Ku Klux Klan would march downtown and look in all the stores.
I remember seeing the Klan's march.
And if they caught a black man on the streets, they just beat him down.
It would be bad for any blacks to get around them at that time.
Ruby had a unique opportunity to receive an incredible education. She was able to attend the Fessenden Academy, which had the reputation of being one of the few places throughout the region where an African-American child could receive a world-class education.
Mr. Fessenden came down to Florida. He found that black kids having school in the old Union log cabin. So he built a school on this beautiful hill that became Fessenden Academy. And that was the greatest thing that could have happened in the whole state of Florida, because it was the best school, I guess, anywhere. It was just a miracle.
It attracted students from throughout the region, the Caribbean, as well as Africa. And it had a reputation of producing graduates that were both ambitious and incredibly talented.
Most of the graduates have that in them. A zest for knowledge and a desire to move beyond the ordinary circumstances that one might find themselves in. To always advance, to reach for something greater than they perhaps ever had. She had a pretty face and pretty hair, but I thought she was like reserved, very, very reserved. But I noticed it as like, and the kids would say, oh, she sure is, she's like selfish. And she's conceited, or she's to herself, or was like that. It was just kid, and they can be very cruel. I know that.
My mama said her school, get her good education, all that.
I studied nursing there for 2 years. I've always wanted to relieve suffering.
The story goes that she'd actually been dating one young man but decided to begin dating Sam McCullum because, in her opinion, he was more ambitious and that she would be able to go further in life. And so the two of them get married.
Okay,
and
period.
like a lot of other African Americans during this period in time, they decided to leave the segregated South and travel to New York. Sam McCullum's brother, Buck, had the good fortune to get involved in the life insurance business. He sends word to Sam that this may be a good opportunity for him and Ruby, and the couple make the decision
I'm really eating
to
right
move
now.
back to Florida, eventually settling in Live Oak.
I remember her as a very beautiful black woman. She was one of my favorite aunts.
In a very intelligent
Crawfish.
lady. She was a good person in the church, African Baptist church. Sam put a lot of money into that church, made donations, and they were thought of as good people in the community. I think there were people that if people were down and out, they could go to them and get a favor or get some help from them. So they were thought of as good people.
Ruby and Sam and their family were well known in Live Oak. Very well known.
My cousins had everything you could name.
Now, Ruby, she usually bought the grocers. And her husband, when he come with her, he usually stayed around the car. But he was well-dressed man, well-mannered, real polite, and he always had a new car.
She always got a brand new Chrysler New Yorker. Every time we saw her at age 6, 7 years old, she always says, "Here's a quarter for you." And I was glad to see something larger than a penny.
When you met Ruby, you could tell that she had money.
They were some of the richest people, in Florida.
Sam used to come out and hunt quails on my grandmother's place. And he would sit to the table and eat with us and talk and laugh. I mean, he just was a simple person. Plus, he used to own all the jukeboxes that was in the nightclub.
The first time he walked in, he darkened the room. His whole body covered or blocked the light out. I said, he's lost.
He was opening the door for her and all this kind of stuff. Never heard anything
Some
of
of
it.
these is smile.
Only he was Bolita King.
Bolita.
Bolita.
Sam was known as the Bolita King
Bye.
for this area.
Bolita literally means little ball, and its earliest incarnation, it was very similar to the way the lottery is run. People would bet on which number would be chosen.
Tourism and citrus were the number 1 and 2 industries. Bolita may have been number 3 because it was just rampant.
Bolita was extremely popular all across Florida. And individual kingpins, they could be making a couple $100,000 a year at that time just from the Bolita rackets. And we can trace many fortunes in the state of Florida, many respectable fortunes, back to Bolita.
Oh, it was widespread. They were ushers in the church. They were deacons on the deacon
This
boards
shit's
in
spicy.
churches.
I love it.
They actually wrote the numbers. The money was being made by a lot of big people. And there was a lot of big people in Live Oak involved outside of Sam McCullum.
And the name that kept coming up time and time again is that of Dr. Clifford Leroy Adams.
Oh, yeah, I know Dr. Adams. He was kind of a stocky kind of a man, intellectual-looking gentleman, kind of with black. Never like Newt Gingrich.
Now, how long had you known Dr. Adams?
Ever since 1945. About 3 months before Sonia was born.
I ain't never heard of Ruby
She is now 7
Ruby
years
McCullough.
Dr. Adams was the people's doctor.
I was
I heard
raised
of
with
Ruby
many of you.
Bridges.
I went to school with many of you. I dug
But
ditches
I'm
on
from
the
Texas, so
WPA
it's
with
whitewash.
many of you. I rode turpentine woods and worked with timber around many of your holes. I have served many of you as a druggist in retail drugstores.
Leroy Adams was a powerful and popular guy.
Probably weighed at least 250, 300 pounds, but he wasn't. I wouldn't say he was
Why
fat,
she
but
kill
he
that
was
white
just a
man?
Big man. I was called just a big man.
Dr. Adams was a huge man and very friendly and nice.
My recollection of Dr. Adams was he was kind, he was I was not afraid to go to the doctor.
He lived right at the hospital. He could walk out his door into the hospital almost.
It wasn't just the black poor people. He took care of poor people.
We always thought he was a fine doctor, and he would make house calls back then. He'd go all the way out in the country to see if he was sick.
This was more than
Yes,
enough
I'm
food.
sure that there were many people in Suwannee County that were treated by Dr. Adams that he never received a penny for.
Well, if you had like fried chicken or something, well, he'd grab a
I only
piece of
spent
that.
$11.
He's just a good old fella. Just made himself at home.
Dr. Adam and Sam McCullough hunted together. Dr. Adam was lots of time would go to Sam's house, and I guess they would talk and have dinner.
I shook the jackpot.
The way he carried himself, he thought he knew everything about everything, and he thought he knew the black community better than anybody else.
Since that time, have you been more or less continuously under his care as a physician?
Well, slightly, in a way, and then in a way I wasn't. I discontinued going to him too very often after I found out what it was all about.
There were all kinds of daily interactions that put black women in very peculiar and difficult places.
Did he at any time have any other relations with you other than as a private physician and doctor?
Black women in the segregated South were almost always vulnerable. They could be approached, flirted with, and they knew what that meant. They knew that that was the introduction to a nightmare.
Tell us if you ever had sexual intercourse with Dr. Adams and where it was.
It was in my home in 1948, the first time I ever had any sexual relations with Dr. Adams.
We just couldn't believe it because it was just impossible. That just things like that didn't happen.
To me, it wasn't. Not really. I
He fucked on a black
seen
woman
him
first.
out in the hospital messing around with the women. I can remember hearing him ask one woman, he sort of pet her on the butt and he's asked her about, where can I get some of this or something like that, you know.
And he came back out there next morning about 9:30 and took me upstairs and laid me down on the bed and began the intercourse.
White men maintained relationships, short-term and long-term, with black women, but none of that was ever supposed to rise to the surface. It was never to be discussed in decent company. All of that was supposed to be submerged.
And when it was finished, he left. And he said, I will be back some other time.
White men in the Jim Crow South, they were able to take black women at will and do what they wanted to do with them without any kind of fear of punishment or even persecution within the community.
And he said, I'm not afraid, and I don't want you to be afraid of it. No one is going to bother me. That is a definite. I told him okay. And that made me begin to be afraid of him.
She was a black, good-looking lady. She probably started going to the doctor for medical reasons, and I believe the doctor taking advantage of her.
There was almost a law that if a white man wanted to go with somebody's wife, he could do that.
Did you continue then after this first time to have sexual relations with Dr. Adams up until the time of his death?
Yes, sir.
My cousin Jordan,
That's why she killed him.
he was an older man. He told me that was a law. That if a white man wanted to go with a black woman, that was his right. If the black woman didn't really have the right to deny.
It was a cultural practice in the United States that goes back to slavery times.
He said he was coming back, and he kept coming back. Neighbors saw him coming and going.
Back then I had a cousin lived out pretty close to her, and they said there was nothing to see him every morning, or in the morning, coming out the house, Ruby McCullough's house.
The woman we'll weigh the options. What are her chances for survival if she says no?
What consent means is it means that a person has full understanding of the consequences of giving consent.
And so she consents. Is that still a consensual relationship? I don't know.
The question would be, could she afford not to consent?
I don't know whether she had a choice to enter into them, but I guarantee once she was in it, she didn't have a choice of whether to get out or not.
Ruby McCullough was raped. When you have a history of the raping of black women in this country, in the South, the way it was for Ruby McCullough, I don't care what anybody says. Living with the fear of not doing what a white man told you to do was death. Not just death for you, but death for your family. Burn your house down, hurt your kids.
Doc Adams had a lot going on that people didn't really know about. It was much kind of a Jekyll Hyde scenario, and that he was the saint one time, but then he had all these evil things going on otherwise.
Everything that Doc Adams did from the time that he was first going to go to pharmacy school and then medical school.
Bitch, I know I didn't lose them damn guards.
He got into medical school on false pretenses. He just lied to everybody.
I took pride in Leroy. I thought he was a big man.
I know I took them hoes out.
Running with Sam McCollum in the Polita racket, and I knew of his relationship with Ruby. In 1949, he got into his first
Bro, that's some bullshit.
A federal grand jury indicted him for submitting fraudulent bills and collecting money for services he claimed